We spent some time last week, I think, talking about the fact that here we are, October of 2025. It was 40 years ago. 30 years ago. I can't do the math anymore because we had our first referendum in 1980. We had the second one in 1995, so 30 years ago. And we've been talking about, some people who were there, people who spoke to Jean Chrétien at the time, learning details now that we found out. But it was 20 years ago, not 30, 20 years ago, that a dozen Quebecers from various political backgrounds, led by former Premier Lucien Bouchard, signed a manifesto called Pour un Québec lucide, for a clear-eyed vision of Quebec is how I guess we translate that into English, which outlined challenges that Quebec faced then, but wasn't addressing, things like a lagging economy and an aging population. Sound familiar? Our next guest was one of the signatories to that declaration and is on the line. Andre Pratte, communications consultant, former Canadian senator. Mr. Pratte, thank you for your time this afternoon. I guess if I asked you, do you remember that 20 years ago and how serious, how dire it seemed then compared to where we are now?
I certainly remember the process of writing this document with many very bright, intelligent people from different political backgrounds, as you mentioned. We were very concerned then, and I haven't talked to all the other authors, but certainly today I'm still very concerned. Some of the things that we said then did not turn out true, but many of them, including the government of Quebec, the government's financial situation, population aging is still a very big challenge for Quebec. So I'm certainly very concerned about Quebec's future.
To your point, when you say some of the things you warned about then did not materialize, again, it's hard to predict the future 20 years later, but I know there was a report coming out from researchers or came out at the University of Sherbrooke updating that manifesto. What in that update that you were worried about then, if you can remember, did not come to pass?
Well, the Quebec's economy went through a nice period over the last few years, and if you compare it to Ontario, which we did then, and Quebec performed quite badly compared to Ontario. In fact, if you look today at comparative figures, you see that Quebec's economy did pretty well over the last 20 years compared to Ontario's. But that's very important. It's compared to Ontario's, right? Because Ontario did not do very well economically over the last 20 years. They had a very difficult period. If you look to Quebec's economy in absolute terms, unemployment is much better than we thought it would be. And the demographic challenge, population aging, we did much better because we had very high immigration. In fact, unexpectedly high immigration. But now, as you know, the current government wants to dramatically reduce immigration, and we go back to exactly the same, demographic challenge. That is a population that is aging quickly and actually going down depending on the number of immigrants that we welcome in Quebec.
And there's sort of the irony here, right? On the one hand, you have a government provincially here committed to lower and lower immigration numbers. And on the other side, you have businesses saying, we want immigrants here. And if you warn about an aging population and a lower birth rate, without those immigrants, where are we left?
Yes, and we know that increase in population is one of the main driving factors of a growing economy. If you have fewer people, you have a weaker economy. And this is exactly the situation today, is that we have more people who are deceased each year than we have a number of births. So that the only growth in population that we have comes from immigration. If you decrease immigration dramatically, you will have a reduced population, not only a population that is aging quickly, but actually the number is going down, and that makes for a much weaker economy, less innovation, obviously employers looking for employees, not finding them, therefore they can't capitalize on growth opportunities. So, it looks quite abstract, demographics, but in fact it has very concrete impact. It has a very concrete impact on many facets of our society. And the other thing that we did not get wrong is the government's financial situation. We know that we have now a deficit of close to $14 billion. We actually pay $10 billion in interest each year. So some people say, well, it's not so serious because if we compare Quebec to other jurisdictions, we're not doing that bad. But we're still paying more than $10 billion in interest in each year. And certainly our thinking then, and the way I see it today, that kind of money should be spent on other priorities or reducing taxes for Quebecers rather than simply on interest because we have too high of a debt.
By the way, to your point, when you first said about we were doing better economically, again, we are running the largest deficit in Quebec history. So I think that's important once again to point out. And those things don't tend to turn around in the matter of 6 months or even a year or two.
No, it's going to be a major challenge. And a lot of the experts in fiscal issues note that about 2/3 of that deficit is called what we call structural expenses. This is things that are very difficult to turn around. It's just not a matter of, giveaway by government, a subsidy or so on. These are things that are difficult to turn around. Salaries, for instance, or the number of employees that has increased tremendously over the last 5 or 10 years. So these are difficult things to turn around, and whatever government we choose next year for the provincial election, they will have a very hard time dealing with this issue. We know that already one rating agency has downgraded Quebec's credit rating. That means that borrowing becomes more expensive. And who knows what will happen if we don't get our public finances in control over quite rapidly, actually.
Yeah, and of course the one great unknown here is what happens south of the border, right? That was never really a concern up until now when we have a Donald Trump administration, and that could throw things or make things potentially even worse.
Absolutely, and of course that's not something we could predict 20
Right.
years ago. One thing we did look at was the competition from Asian countries, and that is still an issue. Again, it looks very abstract, but in reality, when we try to export our goods around the world, we have competitors now, China, India, that can produce quality goods at much more cost effectively than what we can do in many aspects. So there are many challenges that remain, and my concern certainly is that when I looked at different political parties, political parties never like to give bad news. So no one is really looking at the solutions to those problems that we will face in the next couple of years and in the next decade, actually.
If I could, just before we wrap up here, with relation to something else, not specifically what we were talking about 20 years ago, but this rush, if you will, for a Quebec constitution, which seems to be something that François Legault really wants to get done. What do you make of this? How important is this? Is it necessary? What do you think?
Well, I'm not against the Quebec Constitution. Actually, I worked with the Quebec Liberal Party in drafting ideas around this project, but it's certainly not a priority for Quebecers. I mean, we have bad economic news practically each day now, in part because of Mr. Trump's policies. So it's not a priority. And if we do decide to, provide Quebec with a constitution, which other provinces have, so it's doable, it's something that everyone should be involved in. I mean, it's just not something that you rush into just because a political party wants to score political points because it's popular amongst certain Quebecers. So it's something you have to give a lot of thought to, and you have to consult Quebecers of all walks of life to see how they feel about it and what they believe should be in a Quebec constitution if we decide to have one. But again, I don't think it's something that should be a priority. There are so many problems that we're facing today that a Quebec constitution or trying to amend the Canadian constitution, for that matter, shouldn't be a priority for any political party.
We will leave it at that. Mr. Pratte, always appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Aaron. Bye.
Andre Pratte, former Canadian senator 20 years ago. Not a lot, I think, is changed. Well, yeah, to some degree, I guess, as he said, but so many things remaining. A problem now that were still a problem 20 years ago.
Unmistakably Canadian.
It's the music that raised you.
The artists raising the bar.
Hi, this is Brian Adams.
Hey, my name's Brett Emmons. I'm from the Glorious Sons.
Hi, I'm Nelly Furtado.
Made in Canada. The station that champions Canadian music.
Loud, proud, and all yours.
No passports required. Just press play.
Tap into Made in Canada now on iHeartRadio.ca
Or the free iHeartRadio app.